The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
After the wise men had left, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother with you, and escape into Egypt, and stay there until I tell you, because Herod intends to search for the child and do away with him." So Joseph got up and, taking the child and his mother with him, left that night for Egypt, where he stayed until Herod was dead. This was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken through the prophet, "I called my son out of Egypt." After Herod's death, the angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother with you, and go back to the land of Israel, for those who wanted to kill the child are dead." So Joseph got up and, taking the child and his mother with him, went back to the land of Israel. But when he learnt that Archelaus had succeeded his father Herod as ruler of Judea, he was afraid to go there, and being warned in a dream, he left for the region of Galilee. There he settled in a town called Nazareth. In this way, the words spoken through the prophets were to be fulfilled. He will be called a Nazarene. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
On a beautiful topic such as the Holy Family, naturally we want to think about our own families, our Christian families, and what goes into making and building it a happy and a holy Christian family, and what doesn't help it to flourish. Of course, there are so many things that can be said, but first of all, let's acknowledge that the Holy Family, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, had it pretty tough. I mean, the baby was hunted from when he was a child, was just born. They know what it's like to live as refugees. We don't know for how long they lived in the land of Egypt before they came back to the land of Israel. Maybe 2 years, maybe a bit longer. And then, of course, trying to avoid, as Jesus was growing, where was he born and so forth, and the possibility of being discovered. Of course, the poverty was an issue. They were, I suppose, a typical family like so many of their time. So they had their own difficulties. Likewise, we too have difficulties in raising families. Raising a family in this culture is perhaps one of the most difficult eras in history to raise a family. Because in addition to all the natural challenges that I'm going to talk about that come as part and parcel with raising a human family, there's also so many other factors which in the ancient world either did not exist or didn't exist or existed in a much more controlled way. What sort of challenges am I talking about the family, and particularly in our own day? We've got all the beginning of life issues that are undermining family life. Contraception, the abortion issue, IVF issue. All these things are in fact hindering about family life. Why? Because they make children into commodities rather than gifts from God. That rather than being open to the act and the fruitfulness of intimacy between spouses, our modern culture tells us you decide all of these things. You even decide what kind of a child, is it a boy or a girl, and so forth. And because of young ears being obviously discreet about these issues. However, we know what we are dealing with, and we must be very mindful of these issues. So that's at the beginning of life issue. The family life in our culture is under challenge and attack. On the end of life issue, where the mentality that somehow it's dignified to kill a relative, to kill a loved one through euthanasia, that this is a dignified way of leaving, that somehow my ailing father or mother one day, my father's already died, but my ailing mother one day, if she ever develops a condition, that the way to love her into eternity is to end her life soon. That is to play God, and that is to show less than gratitude for somebody who has brought us into this world. But those issues, and there's a mentality that floats around. I mean, in Western Australia, the law has just come in, I believe, and again, it's constantly, there are forces that want to bring this upon the family. And then there's all the middle life issues, namely the issue about marriage. What constitutes marriage? Marriage is a man and a woman open to life. That's what constitutes a marriage, according to the nature, according to God's plan. Not according to the plan of some political powerful group in our society. How easy it has become to divorce and to separate. Our laws do not help for strong families, and a whole lot of other issues as well. So, all of these are in the background when it comes to raising a Christian family. But it's already difficult to raise a Christian family because human nature is wounded and human nature is flawed and limited. And yet, God works through all of this. Even for the Holy Family, it was difficult for Joseph and Mary to raise Jesus. Not because he was an upstart kind of a child, he was divine, sinless, but because growing up means adjusting and moving. And that adjusting and moving and growth is painful. If there is no pain in growing, it's not real growth. There's also an adjustment and a growth that has to go on in the parents. Parents don't just get married and have children and remain static forever. Parents who've remained static and haven't changed haven't done their job. So I'm just going to start first of all from the role or the perspective of the child, and then I'll talk a little bit about the perspective of the adults raising children. And this applies as much to parents as to grandparents. I know there are a lot of grandparents here today, and you have a role as well, not only with your children, but with your grandchildren as well. When children are born, well, before I start that topic, who of you who is parents here, father or mother, finds it easy to do? Put your hand up if you find it easy. Nobody puts their hands up. Being a child, which is everybody here, who has found that being easy? Put your hand up. Yeah, one? Okay. That's a great compliment on the parents there, so that's fantastic, We've got saintly parents here. I'm not sure about the saintly child, but anyway. So, but the reality is, if it were easy being a child with parents, do you think God would have had to put in a commandment? Honor your father and mother? Don't think so. Don't think so. He didn't put a commandment in, make sure you have your 3 meals a day, and make sure you sleep at night, and we do these things automatically. We don't need instruction from God. But we do need an instruction about honouring our father and mother. Because God knew that there'll come times when children will resent, or at least may resent their parents. They will butt heads with their parents. They will see cracks in their parents and call them out. And so on and so forth. So, being a child of parents, even good parents, great parents, can be difficult, and even raising good children will be difficult at times. See, children come without instructions. How many times, I wish that parents had instructions, and you think, wow, and if you could follow them, things would be much, much easier. But they don't come with instructions. So, parents love each other, and this love has now taken on human form and living. It's incarnate. It's different to any other act of love. I can do an act of kindness to someone, an act to give them a present, I can give them a hug, I can pay them a compliment. None of these results in a new human life. But that special act of love reserved for parents in marriage, that when it's open to God creating, can allow for a fruit that will not only last in this life, but destined to live for eternity. Those of you who have children, I pray will be surrounded by your children in eternity. And your children, every one of them, will be an eternal sign, not only before God, but before all the others who will be saved, of your love for one another, your generosity, your openness to life. Something that you've started in this life will live for eternity. That famous line in the film The Gladiator, where Maximus says, what we echo or what we do in this life echoes in eternity. Echoes in eternity. So children come without instructions, and they naturally, the parents dote over them. And children then start to get a bit older, and they reach that magic age of 2. And we call it the terrible 2s because children are now looking for boundaries, and they're beginning to stretch things and so forth. And it happens, by the way, between 18 months and 3 years of age. Psychologists call it, it's like a psychological birth. Up to that point, it's what we call, what psychologists call, the child has a symbiotic relationship with its mother. The baby thinks it's one unit with mum. It doesn't realize it's actually a separate entity. But after that point, the child begins to realize and becomes self-aware, I'm actually different from mum and dad. They can give me instructions and I can disobey them. Now, good parents will discipline their children. And discipline, I know, is a dirty word, because parents are supposed to be friends with their children in our culture. Mistake. Big mistake. It's one of the worst things that parents can do, to be friends with their children. The best thing parents can do with their children is to be benevolent dictators. Benevolent dictators. You are the experts. God's given them to you to love them and to look after them and to nurture them in the best way you know how. And if that means disciplining them, whatever it takes, putting them to their rooms, speaking sternly, looking at them firmly, or giving them a little smack if need be, whatever. Each child is different. And those of you who have more than one child will realize very clearly that each child is so different. They're being raised in the same family, same parents, and yet they're different. Of course they're different. Not only do they have a different body, they have a different spirit inside them, a different soul. And so each child needs to be disciplined and tailored or raised in a way that best suits their needs. This requires constant adjustment on the parts of the parents. It's not easy. It's not easy. In fact, it's very difficult, because you think you've got it right for the first one, and then, because they've turned out wonderfully and so forth, and then the second one comes along, you think, where did you come from? The milkman? But that's the reality. There's a different spirit inside. So we need, and parents need to realize that. That's why the constancy about having Christ at the center of our families. Because Christ will speak to you and tell you, this one needs more of this, less of that. And that attunement of spirit requires a constant listening to the Holy Spirit, who will lead you in the way of being effective parents. But then as children grow, in their early years, especially with moderate, not even great parents, but with moderately successful parenting, but definitely with great parenting, children think their parents can't do any mistakes in their childhood, And they think, wow, and they even compete with each other, my dad's better than your dad, my granddad's stronger than yours, my mum's the best, blah, blah, blah. And the reality is, my mum is the best for me, because she's the best one I know. My father's the best one for me. He's the best one I know. But then something happens. The child continues to grow and mature and breaks into the teenage years, the second rough period of one's life. Now in teenage years, what's beginning to happen? The child is growing and moving towards adolescence, 17, 18, 19 years of age. And the mind is developing. So now they begin to see the cracks in their parents. They realize their parents are not infallible as they once thought. They realize their parents have limitations. And although in their heart of hearts, most teenagers, quietly, they're not going to admit them to their parents, they'll think their parents are probably on the right track. But I don't like them giving me instruction. I don't like them telling me what to do. So I'm not going to admit that to them. Sometimes they're actually genuinely seeing cracks in their parents, which their parents don't see. So then naturally, as we move towards adulthood, there is a natural need of establishing our independence from our parents. And this is a good and natural and healthy and necessary thing to happen. Parents need to realize that children are given to them on loan to prepare them, to help them mature, to educate them, form their character. And education, by the way, is not about reading and writing and science and arts and crafts. All those things are important, but they're actually secondary. The most fundamental role in the education of children is actually to shape the children's moral character in terms of the virtues of being just and loving and respectful and mastering themselves, and at having the attitude of faith and knowledge and love of God. If children have these qualities, they will be much better equipped in life than any first-class education in that conventional sense of the word. I'm not saying it's not important to know how to read and write. Obviously, it is very important. But it's far more important to know when one is acting foolishly. It's far more important to know how to act with justice. It's far more important to know how to know when to bite your tongue and when to speak. It's far more important to know how to exercise self-control. We live in a society that has experienced an educational level higher than perhaps any other before. In fact, I could say that confidently. Our society has had more education than any other before. But I won't say the same for the formation in moral character. That is quite questionable. The indifference, the selfishness that is around. So then parents, when they're seeing this little somebody that used to be a grasshopper and now they've become a young man or woman, is that easy for a parent to accept? No, it isn't easy. I remember when I was going through this phase and I was butting heads with my late father, God rest his soul. I love him dearly. But I'd be having discussions with him, and of course I was studying philosophy and theology in the seminary, and we'd typically get on to some philosophical or theological point. And my father loved his faith and knew it at a catechetical level, but he didn't have it at a theological level. So I knew I could win the debates, right? Anyway, you see where I'm going. Well, what was really going on? And he'd say to me, I hope you never say this to people when you become a priest. You're going to make a terrible priest, and blah, 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 and you'll lead them astray, and so forth. He would say it to me, but I knew it was actually because he couldn't get the upper hand in the argument. And I wasn't happy, this is stupid on my part, right? But I wasn't happy just to know that I had proven the point. I now had to shove it down his throat and force him to admit defeat. To have your father hold up a white flag? Dumb. Not only is he not going to do it, but it's disrespectful of me to do that. Anyway, we'd have these headbutting competitions and whatever when I'd be home from holidays. I'm not proud of it, right? But anyway, that's what happened. And eventually I realized what was going on deep down. It wasn't about winning a theological debate. It was about me trying to establish my independence from him. Dad, I'm a man now. What do you think? Can I make it through life? Do you think I could imitate you in some way? Do you think I could be half as good as you are? And what I was really looking for is to hear from my father say, good on you, well done, good and faithful servant. You made me proud, blah, 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 blah. Those sorts of things. But I didn't realize that. It took me years to finally work it out. And then, once that happened, I was actually able to have a friendship with my father. But Parents cannot have friendships with their children in the early years of their life. And it's sad when you sometimes hear cases where parents are unburdening themselves with deep emotional things to their 12 or 13-year-old son or daughter. They don't have the maturity at that age to cope with those things, particularly if they're unburdening things about their spouse. But in adulthood, children can have a friendship with their parents, but the relationship is always fundamentally unequal. The parents always remain parents, and then the friendship. And that's at least what I could do with my father and mother in my adulthood. No parent finds it easy to admit that their child has now become an adult. No parent finds this easy to do, and very few parents do it well. They struggle because children didn't come with instructions. At the age of 21, you're supposed to give them more freedom. Some children require more freedom, some less so. This is about tailoring the parenting according to the needs of each child. There's a lot more things that I could say, but I'll leave it at that for today. But I want you to see these things in light of the Holy Family. Mary and Joseph had to recognize when this child of theirs is now no longer so dependent upon them. But Jesus needed his mother's friendship even in his adult life. But he didn't need her to tell him what to do like he needed her to do that when he was a child. Granted though, he listens to her a lot. The wedding feast of Cana, who kicked off the miracle? Mother Mary. Jesus may have seen that they'd run out of wine, but it was she who tells him they have no wine. He turns around and says, "Woman, what's this got to do with me? My hour has not yet come." In other words, when my hour comes, you realize I start working miracles and teach, I'm no longer going to be just your son. And she understood what he was saying and knew, I'm prepared to let you go, my son. Beautiful act of surrender on the part of Our Lady. As a mother, now she knew his mission must begin. He was 30 years old when that happened. Your children will be ready to fly the nest in their own time, and your grandchildren will be there too. So hopefully, and we all, by the way, do mistakes. I, as a spiritual father, have made many mistakes. I'd like to think I've learned a few lessons in different parishes. And some of our mistakes, we can apologize and rectify things. But other times, we cannot undo history. In fact, we can never undo history. And some of our mistakes can never be undone. And we have to live and accept that. And then on the part of children, one of the things that sometimes as children we can be very unfair to our parents. We can have expectations upon them that they cannot possibly bear. They're expectations that can only be ultimately fulfilled by God himself. And so we need to accept that our parents are limited and with frailty, and we love them despite that. And we thank them for having done the best that they could. And to know that our parents will have faults with them till the day they die, just as we have ourselves. So, ultimately, we're all in the same boat. But in the Holy Family, and there were misunderstandings in the Holy Family, despite Our Lady being sinless, Jesus is divine, and St. Joseph presumably a sinner, but a heroic man, there were misunderstandings. But the way they solved them was with kindness, with love. So yes, when you have to have misunderstandings in the family, or when they are there, have them. Sometimes you need to have an argument. Have the argument. But then also make up. Know how to say sorry if you've done something wrong. Even if you were right, but maybe you're too forceful in your expression. You were a bit harsh. Apologize for that. A sorry goes a long, long way in making a holy family. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, pray for us.